legislatures, which deals with strengthening the use of evidence generation in parliaments. We've got research and learning, which leads our research, diagnostic, or situation analysis in these African countries. They are responsible for developing tools. Then we've got technical advisory services, which actually do evaluations, technical assistance to the African governments that we work with. So some of the centers that we are part of the one in Francophone Africa, which is in Dakar, Senegal. We've got East Asia or South Asia, because Brazil and Lusophone Africa. Then we've got Latin America. And the Global Hub is the headquarters for CLEAR Initiative. So I think the goal really that we would want to achieve at the end of the day is just to increase and refresh some of the knowledge in terms of monitoring and evaluation, in terms of systems and how they actually link to evidence used for improved effectiveness, efficiency, decision making, and policy making. And I can say that monitoring and evaluation right now is in a better place to even inform what is actually happening in the world in terms of COVID-19 pandemic. How then do we use monitoring data to actually inform some decision making? These are some of the things that I'll zero in later on when I am discussing about the issue of evidence in parliament. So some of the objectives that we would want to achieve at the end of the day, just be able to conceptualize the difference between these RIMB concepts like your monitoring, your evaluation, and often we see that in countries that we're working in, there is conflating of these terms: monitoring, evaluation, supervision, auditing, assessment, reviews, and so on. And the types of evidence, systems like the national evaluation systems. I'll try to use some of the African examples in countries that I work in. Then supply of and demand of M&E evidence, and also zoom into the issue of the complexity of using evidence. Why is it sometimes evidence is used? Why is it sometimes evidence is not used? Evidence use or usage is actually a complex thing to do, and is very dynamic. It's influenced by various factors, either internal or external factors. So this is what we always do: to keep yourself muted, you raise up your hand and so on. But importantly, this is just a co-creation kind of space where all ideas and matters are discussed. We might have different views, but the important thing is actually to learn from each other. So the first session that I would zoom into is the one that I was talking about. How then do we define what monitoring is, what evaluation is, what evidence is? That would actually help us to be able to understand when we are now talking about the complexity of using evidence, because there are various types of evidence that are brought on board in parliament, either at Senate level or at National Assembly level, which they have to take into consideration when it comes to decision making. And what kind of evidence will it be? So if one looks at what monitoring is, we are saying that monitoring is a continuous collection of data on predetermined indicators, with the view that you'll be able to inform the implementers of the project of the progress or the lack of progress of a program, a strategy, a policy, and any kind of intervention that would have been identified by different stakeholders. So monitoring is continuous. It doesn't have a start. It doesn't have an end. It actually happens throughout the life cycle of a program. And we find that the data that is elicited from monitoring is used by managers and implementers to make corrections. Monitoring does give early warning signs about a program. Either the program is achieving or is being implemented according to design, according to the plan. And if then it is not implemented according to that, how do we make corrections and how do we make sure that the design is being followed? So it can be a project, program, policy, or a strategy that seeks to change the living well-being of citizens or beneficiaries. And monitoring, like I said, it happens at process, which is your activities. You can monitor your inputs, you can monitor your outputs. And in M&E language, outputs are also seen as first level of results, which are really a transformation that comes as a result of an implementation of an activity. So when you are looking at that, then we're saying that it collects data that is describing the individuals that has been served, the services that have been provided, and the resources that are being used. So you find out later on when we discuss about the types of evaluation, you find that we have some types of evaluation like process and implementation evaluation, which actually zoom into issues of evaluating how services have been provided, if the right dosage is being given. And those are some of the questions that are actually asked when we are doing process monitoring. Like, what population are we serving? Are we reaching the right target? What services are we implementing? What are the barriers or challenges that are being faced in the process of implementing the intervention? Then when it comes to outcome monitoring, then we are tracking the outcomes in terms of the desired change in the project, the desired change in the program. And this really relates to issues of change in knowledge, change in attitudes, change in behavior. And it answers questions like, um, did we actually change some behavior as a result of an intervention? So monitoring does happen at process and at outcome levels. So it is important that when we look at the practice of monitoring and evaluation, although monitoring does provide some important data in as far as project tracking, the kind of knowledge or evidence that it produces does not actually lead to some important decisions that are needed at a policy kind of level. But it is the role of evaluations to feed into that higher decision making and higher policy level making. So monitoring then does feeds into evaluation. When we look at evaluation, then this is more of a systematic application of social research methods to assess the conceptualization, to assess the design, to assess the implementation, to assess the impact and sustainability of a project. And when you look at what actually monitoring does and what evaluation does, they are somewhat different. If you look at evaluation, it does look at the what, the so what, and the now what. When you look at the what, it explains what happened in the implementation of the process of a program, of a project, or a policy, which also the monitoring can do. When you look at the so what, then it determines what the findings really mean. When an evaluation is done, then you tend to ask, what are these findings trying to say? Are we achieving the right outcomes which we have intended to, or we are achieving unintended outcomes? What might be the missing linkage here? And then now what is concerned with providing recommendations based on the findings. So that really separates monitoring from evaluation. What, so what, and now what. And when you look at evaluation, is a domain of applied research. When you look at providing recommendations based on the findings and how you can try to work on the recommendations to make sure that there's program effectiveness, there's program improvement. Then findings are used actually to solve and improve human conditions. So that is really a conceptualization of what monitoring is and what evaluation is. And in terms of the comparison, when you're looking at monitoring, it's just that what are we doing? And at evaluation, what have we achieved? So those are some of the examples that I've just put in. For example, people trained, how many male or female condoms has been redistributed. And when you are looking at the evaluation, you are now seeing the effect of the distribution of those condoms. Either we are reducing teenage pregnancy, or either we are reducing the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases. So that is just the comparison of what actually monitoring offers and what evaluation offers. So when we look at why is it important that we need to do monitoring, either in your community or in your organization, I presume that most of the people on the platform, they are monitoring and evaluation practitioners. While monitoring is important, it is not sufficient. It's only as whether we are doing what we have planned to do. Later on, when I go to the program cycle or project cycle, I'll try to revisit what I would have said using the program cycle. In order to assess whether or not plans are resulting in intended outcomes and impacts, and the reason for this, we need to carry out evaluations. So you find that evaluations are very much important in the program implementation, in that it really provides information on what works, why it works, for whom, and what are the underlying circumstances through which we can determine either it is working or it's not working. And in monitoring and evaluation, most of the interventions sometimes fail because we are not cognizant of how the context actually influences the program, be it the political situation, be it the economic situation, be it religion, be it the values and norms of a community. Those have to be embedded into the evaluation process, even in the conceptualization of the program and the effects that it might have, or the bearing that it might have on the program. So evaluations do involve deep analysis. You are aware of the DART criteria that has been revised, and it speaks to the issue of relevance. Is the intervention doing the right thing? It speaks to the issue of coherence. How well does the intervention fit within what is going on globally? For instance, um, your sustainable development goals, your Agenda 2063, and so on. Effectiveness, is the program achieving its objectives? Efficiency, how well are resources being used? Impact, what is the difference, or what's the difference does the intervention make? Had it not been this intervention, would the people be still in the position that they were in before the intervention? And also speaks to the issue of sustainability. Will the benefits that we have reaped so far last if the program ceases to exist? So those are some of the things that the evaluation do. And most of the commissioners for evaluation, our donors and funders, they always relate to the dark criteria when it comes to evaluations so that people are able to use that. So when it now comes to the issue of evidence, then it becomes somewhat problematic, because you find that the term itself, evidence, is a contested term. What really constitutes evidence is not really known amongst practitioners. We can have so many types of evidence, but fundamentally, evidence is just the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or a proposition is valid or it's true. But it has to meet some certain standards. For those of you who might remember the research methodologies when we're talking about validity, with internal validity and external validity, the extent to which the design and the conduct of a study eliminates the possibility of a bias or biasness. So you find also there are issues of adequacy of reporting. Is the statistics that is available adequate? And does that actually support the findings? So you find that when people now start to engage about issues of evidence, they start to raise concerns over either M&E or monitoring or evaluation really possesses some of these standards. And the key qualities that we find in this evidence is the independence, the objectivity, and how verifiable that evidence is. So you find that in order for people to uphold issues of independence and objectivity, some of the evaluations are not done internally by people who have been implementing a project. They are actually done by people who are external to the project. That is to say, people might be from outside the country, people might be from inside the country, but outside the organization that is implementing. And if one looks into the M&E infrastructure of countries in Africa, their national M&E policies clearly states that there is need for transparency, there's need for independence and objectivity when evaluations are being done. And this really concerns to evaluations like your impact evaluations, like your outcome evaluations. So when one now looks into what other people use as evidence, but it remains that these are not evidence, but it's just an opinion or a claim that do not meet the standards of evidence, like your internal validity, your adequacy, and external validity. So most of the time, opinions are positional, they are subjective, they are selective, they are hard to really verify. And when you look into how decisions are then made, say in parliament, some of the evidence that the MPs brings on board, it's evidence that is opinion based, that is positional. They are the people who are in the suburbs. They see the scarcity of water. They see how deteriorating the health facilities are, and then they bring that. Whereas other people who believe in scientific evidence would ask then, how do you back that evidence? So in making decisions, then there is that complexity, and then that's when people start to talk about how do we use a systems lens in understanding how decisions are made and how decisions are arrived at in parliaments or in organizations that we work in. So some of my observations in countries that I am working in and that I've worked in, you find that monitoring is so dominant over evaluation in Benin, in Ghana, in Kenya, in Tanzania, Senegal, South Africa, Uganda. And this is mainly as a result of how the legislation has been set. You find in South Africa there is something called Municipal Systems Act. There is Public Finance Management Act. And those acts of parliament really talks to the issue of reporting, and that really speaks to the issue also of monitoring. If they speak to issues of evaluation, this is not evaluation about a program, about a project, about a policy, or any kind of intervention. It might be an evaluation of people's performance in their institutions or organizations, or it might be an evaluation of bids. So you find that the way the legislations and the policies have been crafted also influences how monitoring becomes dominant over the evaluation. And you find that now policies are being deliberate to focus on evaluation, given that this is the side that has been neglected. And most of the people, they say, oh, I am an M&E person, but truly from my knowledge, some people can do monitoring, but they can't do evaluations. It is not everyone who can conduct an evaluation. In a sense, people can be commissioners and managers of evaluations, but cannot really undertake an evaluation. So this also speaks to the debates that are going around in African voluntary organization for professional evaluators in terms of professionalization of evaluation and what competencies are really needed for someone to be qualified as an evaluator. So those are some of the experiences in terms of M&E in African countries, and that there is now a focus on making sure that there is generation of quality evidence to inform programming, to inform decision making, budgeting. And I can say that in countries that have got established national evaluation policies, like South Africa, like Uganda, like Benin, you find that these countries, somehow they've moved quite a mileage in terms of how evaluations are becoming to be used in parliaments. It is not only enough to generate information on evaluations or information on programs, projects, and so on, when that information is not being utilized. So the books that I have showed you earlier on really looks into various case studies that talks about scenarios where evidence has been used and where evidence is being applied for a policy, is being applied for reshuffling of our budgets so that some areas receive more attention. So that is really some background in terms of the conceptualization or standardization of terms. I think at this point in time, what we can do is to just take a few comments or questions, then we can move on. And over to you, Patrick, to handle that.
Okay, Dr. Chirao, I've taken over from Patrick.
Okay, sure.
All right. For the questions, we can either type or raise a hand. Then we'll take it from there. How many minutes of questions? Maybe just 2 minutes?
Yeah, just 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. But if there are no questions, because I think people, they are well knowledgeable about what monitoring is, what evaluation is, we can move on. Then we can have a discussion later on sections which really requires that.
Okay. That's okay, and everyone is muted. So if you do want to speak, please unmute yourself first or raise your hand and I'll assist in unmuting.
Okay, so I think I can proceed, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to look at the types of evaluations. I think getting to talking about the use of evidence without zooming into the types of evaluations, what they are, and the kind of information that they elicit would not have done justice for a discussion in terms of the use. So when one looks into the types of evaluations, there are so many types of evaluations that are identified in literature that organizations are using, that even countries are using. So the evaluation cake is so big to the extent that the policies that are created or established in countries, they only pick a few types of evaluations that are actually done in their flagship programs. For instance, if there are people who are well knowledgeable about national development plans, this is a plan that informs the development trajectory of a country. And in that plan, there are flagship programs which need to be evaluated. So those evaluations now lead also to the establishment of various M&E infrastructure, like your evaluation agenda, like your M&E plan. It can be for 5 years, like your M&E strategy for implementation of a national development plan. And the kind of evidence that comes from those evaluations are very important in as far as shaping how policy will be rejigged, how budgets will be allocated, how decision making will be actually done. And the information that is collected from there has got principal users at different stages. You would not expect a minister to be called to be told that we have reached so many people, we have distributed so many COVID-19 testing kits, but he will be more at a strategic level. So evidence from evaluation really sometimes ask questions like, is the program policy achieving its outcomes and why? Is the program policy working and why? Can we keep doing what we're doing with the resources that we have, or continue to achieve results? I'll show you some of the examples of evaluations that have been done in South Africa by the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, and explain what really happened in those evaluations. So when you look at the types of evaluations that I've just picked today, you find that there are different institutions that are offering monitoring and evaluation as a course, as an offering. If I go to Stellenbosch at Christ, you find that they speak of clarificatory evaluation, which is a new term to the M&E fraternity. When you come to the South African government, they are talking of 5 or 6 types of evaluation, but in their national evaluation policy framework, they identify 5 evaluations. So there's what we call diagnostic evaluation, which is actually done before the start of the project to understand the underlying situation and the root causes of the problem. And that can be an evaluation itself in order to prescribe the right interventions. And in most of the work that I've done in more than 10 countries, we actually do this diagnostic or situation analysis to understand the status quo of monitoring and evaluation in a country, so that when we are done, that naturally translates into a capacity strengthening strategy for a country. So in evaluations, we also do that diagnostic evaluation to understand the status quo of the situation. There are so many tools that are used to understand the status quo of a program. One would think of the 5 whys. One would think of the problem tree. One would think of Delphi. There are so many. One would think of the fishbone. There are so many of these tools that can be done to understand that. When you come to the design evaluation, then we are looking at how best can we design this kind of intervention, having got findings from the diagnostic review or evaluation. What is the underlying theory of change that we can put to show that the change can happen in this way? And these are critical parts of change. And when we look at the design also, people would start to talk about your results chain, your logic models, and so on. And again, there are different terminologies that are used to relate to one and the same thing. So the design evaluation is very much important. Then when it comes to the issue of implementation evaluation, or what other people say process evaluation, we are looking at what is happening and why is it happening. Are we reaching the right target? Are we implementing the project according to the design? What is the age group of the people that we are reaching? What are the challenges? How can we improve? So that we do not do the implementation or do the evaluation later on after 3 or 4 years, when we have actually seen that the project is not achieving what it is supposed to achieve. One would speak of impact and outcome evaluation, where one has to check if the evaluation, or if the project rather, or program or policy is producing what we have said at the first, if we would want to see reduction in HIV and AIDS, reduction in sexually transmitted diseases, then one starts to employ these outcome evaluations, impact evaluations. But when it comes to impact evaluations, there are different kinds of methods that are actually used to do this kind of evaluation, because it assesses the changes that can be attributed to a particular intervention, which means that in the community, there might be many other interventions that are dealing with teenage pregnancy, or that are dealing with literacy. So we have to be cognizant of which are these programs, so that when you do your impact evaluation, you are able to attribute, or you are able to contribute. So you find that when it comes to impact evaluations, they talk about counterfactual evaluation designs, which enables evaluators to attribute the cause and effect between interventions and outcomes. So the counterfactual measures what would have happened to beneficiaries in the absence of an intervention. If it wasn't for this intervention that we have done as an organization X, would be the beneficiaries still be in the same position, or they could have been uplifted? So that's the importance of these impact evaluations. And there are very few people who are able to do these impact evaluations, because sometimes they include these experimental designs, randomized control trials. We have to assign people to control groups, and quasi-experimental designs, and so on. So they are really kind of difficult to undertake. They need people also with some statistical backgrounds and so on. But there are also people who are doing these impact evaluations qualitatively, and there are arguments that are put across in literature for that. Then there is also economic evaluations, which really zoom into cost-benefit analysis and expenditure reviews. So these are some of the types of evaluations, and really it raises concerns again when people try to categorize these kind of evaluations. I also need to stress that for those people who are not really into evaluations, you find that one type of evaluation, like an outcome evaluation, can have an process or implementation evaluation questions in it. You can collect information of two evaluations in one kind of evaluation to be an outcome evaluation, but it does have a process or implementation evaluation kind of questions. And when it comes again to these types of evaluation, one can now start to categorize them into various categories. For instance, if you look at ex-ante evaluations, we are saying that processes that support the design of interventions, its purpose is to gather information and carry out analysis that help to define objectives to ensure that these objectives can be met. So this one might be your design evaluation. Then when it comes to ex post evaluation or retrospective evaluations, as some people might say, it's just assessing or evaluating an evaluation after the program has been in operation in order to establish the strengths and the weaknesses. Then some people, they speak of formative evaluations, which are really about assisting in the learning and providing information that will guide program improvement. especially on how, why, and what conditions will a program work, or is it working? And then summative evaluations. So really, one can categorize these kind of evaluations, even though the terminology is actually different. You find that the evaluation questions that animates a certain type of evaluation will be the same. For instance, like your ex ante, which I've said that it is a design, it is a diagnostic. Doesn't matter whether you use ex ante, but the kind of evaluation questions are similar. So this is some of the thinking that I have in terms of implementation evaluation. Does zoom into activities. What activities are we supposed to do? What outputs are we supposed to be producing? What outcomes are we supposed to be reaching? Which resources are we using? How can we improve efficiency and effectiveness in the operation? And really, it also speaks now to the issue of indicators, because you are supposed to have established indicators which you will be able to track. Number of face masks that has been distributed in Mbare, number of tests that has been conducted in Borodale, and so on. So these indicators, they are important also in making sure that we are able to track the progress or lack of progress in an intervention. And the implementation evaluation can be done several times during the intervention. But in reality, evaluations are expensive. So this issue of applying the evaluation several times really becomes difficult, because governments do not have money. Some governments are going under austerity measures. Anything to do with evaluation or monitoring is relegated to the periphery. But won't it be the right time where a government which is going under austerity measures has to implement or has to have a monitoring and evaluation system to ensure accountability, to ensure good governance, and to ensure that resources are put to use correctly? So I chose again impact evaluation, and I've really explained some of the things that happen in impact evaluation. But I want to stress on the importance of baselines, because you find that people, when they do evaluations, sometimes they do not have these baselines. So these baselines are very important in making sure that when an evaluation, like an impact evaluation, is being done, we are able to look back and say, okay, before we put an intervention, this was the situation. And after this, the intervention, this is now the situation. So a baseline is a measure or a position that is used to calculate or locate something. And these are very much important. And hence, we need to also bring in, for instance, the statistics department, or if it's a ministry which deals with statistics, because these are the people who collect information on frequent basis or ad hoc basis, but they do really possess information that is critical to be a baseline for impact evaluations. However, there are people who actually do some of these without looking at the baseline. And I don't know how they would be able to attribute and contribute the intervention to the new situation if they would not have done a baseline study. So it is important to establish a baseline so that you are able to measure your success. And impact evaluations, really, there's not really a set time for when they can be conducted. It all depends with how long the project, program, policy is. But in general, 3 to 4, 5 years, you can do your impact evaluation. But people then who are in M&E start to raise questions around how then can we use the findings of an evaluation, like an impact evaluation, when you find that the political structures are always changing after every 5 years when there are elections. And present day debates in terms of monitoring and evaluation and the use of evaluation, they are now relating to the issue of rapid evaluations. And these rapid evaluations, they are done speedily without compromising the trustworthiness of the information and the quality of an evaluation, so that they are able to feed into decision making and policy making quickly without wasting time or without waiting for 3 to 5 years. And those of you who are knowledgeable and are reading literature and seeing on social media, Eval Partners, they are pushing really for these rapid evaluations. If you look at Twentempele, which is a secretariat at our center, they are pushing also for rapid evaluations. I've also had a chance to review it, and we find that even the South African government is pushing towards rapid evaluation. So right now there are guidelines that are being established for these rapid evaluations, so that information that is generated is used timelessly. Economic and synthesis evaluations. Yes, these are mostly commissioned by donors when they would want to know how well their money has been used, if their money has not been stolen and diverted to other issues. So I would not really get into what they are or what they actually do. I hope Zia will be able to just share the slides, and I'll be able also to share some of the materials that I have on this. Here are some examples from the national evaluation system in South Africa, which had some evaluations like your early childhood evaluation. This was like really at the beginning of the national evaluation system. The grade R nutrition programs for children under 5, land recapitalization and development program, comprehensive rural development, land restitution program. So these were projects that were evaluated in South Africa. And in evaluating such projects, it was found out that almost all these projects needed some major changes. And this really tells us the importance of doing evaluations so that we are able to improve the design, we are able to improve the effectiveness, efficiency, which is the implementation, and we are able to set the program on a better footing so that we are able to reach or achieve the set outcomes as detailed in the logic model, as detailed in the theory of change. So what is important to me is that when these were evaluated, only 2 needed minor changes. Should there have been a continuation of these programs without any evaluation, it could have been catastrophic. Funds could have been continuously channeled into the programs that were not yielding any kind of results. Hence, evaluations were instituted, and there were some changes that were made for these programs to be effective and efficient. Like the land restitution program is actually informing decision making and policy making towards land redistribution in South Africa. But what is also important to note is that countries like Benin, they are now saying that for a country to be government, for a program to be government funded, it has to have a theory of change. I'm not so sure either they've now legislated this. It has to have a theory of change. It has to have a logic model or a results chain. And South Africa is also gonna move the same direction, as they require each and every program to have its own kind of theory of change. So this takes me to the policy or program cycle, which looks at the life cycle of a policy or a program. This is kind of a summary of what I've been talking about. When you look at the quadrants that are here, 4 of them, there's diagnosis or diagnosing, which means that there's need to understand what is known about the problem. And I've said that there are different tools that are used. Your fishbone, your 5 whys, your problem tree, which I think some of you might have used when you are conceptualizing programs. It's unfortunate that we are under this pandemic. Should there been ability to meet, then we're going to do some practicals, which was the intention during the scheduled evaluation week in Bulawayo. We could have done this practically. So what is known about the problem? Then understanding the root causes of that, then going into the literature to see what are some of the options that can be used to make sure that we address the problem. Often programs get instituted without proper diagnosis. Some other day, a friend of mine was sharing a joke with me, saying that one of an NGO went into a village and they wanted to make sure that there is running water in the village. As part of social reproduction, women go and fetch water from water sources, be it a dam, be it a river. And then this NGO X comes into the village. They said, oh, look, these people, they do not have water. Why not put bores, put taps on different points so that people are able to get safe drinking water, and it saves them a lot of time to actually walk to the dam and rivers and collect water. Bores were put, Then tapes were also put in the village. After some time, the organization came to actually check either the program that they have is actually yielding some results. Surprisingly, they found out that the tapes were taken off, not because they were stealing. They found that it was no longer useful. And in their informal conversation with the women that they thought they were helping, to their shock, they heard that actually going to the river saved social cohesion, where women would start to gossip about their husbands, should talk about what is going on in terms of their intra-household relations with members of their family and so on. That kind of story gives us the importance of really understanding the problem. Should they have understood the problem, they might have looked at other alternatives to solving what was the problem. So when you have the diagnostics, you now move on to the issue of planning and designing. That's where the theory of change comes into play. And the theory of change should be easier to read and should be accompanied by a narrative. If we do this, then we are able to achieve that. Then when it comes to the design, we are now able to operationalize the theory of change, maybe into a logic model, maybe into a M&E framework, so that we are able to track. We have an operational plan, we have our resourcing. It's a pity that some of the projects, they end before they are supposed to end. They die naturally. So now when you move to the quadrant, which has to do with outputs, now implementing the plan, are we doing the right thing at the right time? Are we giving the right dosage? Then we doing our monitoring. We're looking at our indicators. Then we review and refine and continue. Then what is important now is the outcome and impact. Either what we are planned is being achieved, either the intervention is value for money, and what is the desired change and the undesired change. So really, this is a program cycle, how the program policy or any intervention actually travels through the life cycle. It's very important to do it this way, as I have personally seen the benefits. So information generated should be able to inform decision making at various points, should be able to influence policy at a higher level. So I don't know at this point in time if we can have some discussion. People can share their experiences, not necessarily ask questions, because this is more like a co-creation. What do we see as challenges in places that we are seeing in terms of maybe diagnosing problems, in terms of theories of change, in terms of maybe evaluations broadly, and so on. Over to you, Chair, for such discussion.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chirao. Before we open for plenary, we had a question from Gilchrist.
Is it on the chat?
It's on the chat. He had posted just after you had indicated if anyone has a question. Gilchrist, has it been answered after he continued with the presentation? Or would you still want to go ahead and ask the question you had?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yes, I had a question earlier on evidence use. So I wanted to know what are the trade-offs, you know, and complexities around evidence, participation, and populism in terms of the values. So perhaps maybe he might answer later on that one, or he has the response now. Because we talked, there was a presentation on evidence and opinion and an example of the water situation and all that stuff in that example. So I wanted to know the trade-offs and complexities around evidence and participation and populism and values. Is there any trade-offs and complexity around that?
So in terms of that, there is a session which I'll get into where we talk about these issues of trade-offs, like what really gets to be called, this is the evidence that we are going to go with, and how then can we strike a balance between, you know, two desirable but incompatible kind of elements, like you are saying, populism, values. So I think that I will try to answer in the session that will talk about the complexity of using evidence and even generation of evidence. But I have noted that that question in terms of the trade-offs, and also would welcome people to share their experiences in terms of that.
Yeah, thank you very much for the response. I've noticed Sherlock has also asked me a question on what has been our experience on evidence use in Zimbabwe. So I'll just give a brief background about us. My name is Gilchrist Ndongwe. I work for an organization called Zimbabwe Evidence Informed Policy Network. Essentially, we are a civil society organization which focuses on promoting and facilitating the use of evidence in policy making, in governance and development. We work across sectors, health sector, agriculture, and even the governance sector. So our experience, we have been, over the past years, we have been implementing and operationalizing the program called Building Capacity to Use Research Evidence, which was funded by UK Aid. So our focus has been on, our focus really, yes, we've been conducting capacity building activities across 3 levels, mainly individual level, systemic level, and institutional. So because what we have learned from our diagnostic evaluation before we began, we conducted some diagnostic exercises where we noticed that training alone in terms of use of evidence is not enough. So because if you train a cohort of people, yes, they might have the skills, then what next? Is training going to change the behavior in terms of the behavior on the use of evidence? So we also have projects around. We also conducted work around the systemic, the institutional processes and systems. So we then embedded our training with the institutional process systems, where we make sure that besides the training, we also develop tools and processes which facilitate the use of evidence within the key institutions. So we have worked with the Parliament of Zimbabwe, we have worked with the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, the Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Youth. But currently we are implementing a project under WHO where earlier on you talked about rapid reviews, where we are conducting rapid reviews on different demand-driven topics within the ministry itself. So we have done some, for example, under the COVID now, we have done some rapid reviews on face masks, a month ago, perhaps, which influenced this mandatory face mask. I can't attribute that to now. And we also done some rapid reviews on institutional quarantine, where we did some rapid evidence review on guidelines for institutional quarantine. Essentially, this is our work. But yes, evidence in terms of our experience, yes, the demand for evidence is there. But sometimes you can bring the evidence on the table, but its use, you must also note that evidence use is a political process. You know, evidence itself is political and its use is political. So sometimes you might bring evidence which is not in line, you know, with the political landscape. So basically, this is what we have been doing and what we are doing. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for sharing such experiences. You doing great job in terms of cultivating the culture for evidence use, either research, evaluation, systematic reviews, which I'll touch on later on. But what I have seen very important in African states is that there is that need to shift the norms and axiologies in terms of how then do senior administrative people and the political bearers or elites be conscientized in terms of appreciating the value of evidence and what evidence can play in decision making, budget allocation, versus what experiential evidence that they always bring on board, you know. What are they, how can we balance the two? Because I understand that there is complexity in terms of which evidence do we go with, and also the importance of making sure that there is less of politicization of evidence that is available, but geared towards how then do we make sure that the evidence leads to social change in terms of how services are delivered. This is really the importance of evidence. And importantly, I think us as M&E people, we need also to now start talking about how do we make sure that the parliamentarians, senior administrative people like our permanent secretaries, our deputy permanent secretaries, our director generals like in South Africa, ask the right policy questions which really brings the right evidence, so that we are able to now strike a balance. And I'm sure that at present moment, the demand, yes, is there, but it is not quite enough in terms of the use. So most of our training should be, our trainings should be geared now towards these people who end up with the evidence that we produce, rather than keep on with the supply. I can say that the supply is enormous right now. And in the coming weeks, in June, I think we'll be sharing some of our experiences in the book that I've said, edited by Ian and Mine, as some of the starting points in as far as how do we conscientize politicians and senior administrators in terms of use. So there's really need for a balance between supply and demand. Then I also see which methodology, quantitative or qualitative, yields more useful results for diagnostic reviews. Really, there isn't really one which can be said useful, because most of the times we tend to triangulate the methods. I am a qualitative person. I'm really a social constructionist. I believe that people should be given time to accentuate their voices, and you get deeper to know the the problem. But now when it comes to the quantitative, these are really numbers. I'm really sorry for those people who are quantitative people, that I'm going to say that quantitative to me doesn't really give me enough in terms of what I would be looking into, especially when it comes to social problems. So I see Shylock saying that, Beverly, what has been the experience with the Zim Parliament?
We
Yes,
do have Beverly's hand up.
Okay, sure, she can weigh in.
Oh, yes.
All right, thank you, and good morning to you all. For Parliament, we have the research department, which has researchers which work with members of Parliament so that they assist them in their like debates, supporting them with like research ideas, and also in terms of like the evidence, how to present it in Parliament. But we have had challenges in that we have quite a number of research staff as compared to our members of Parliament who need assistance. But generally, recently we have seen like some of our members of Parliament really debating well, providing evidence in Parliament, which has also like motivated even the executive to adopt some of the recommendations. So that's how it is in Parliament. The research department, it needs more capacitation also, because they are few, and also in terms of like how to go deep into some of the researches so that they're able to assist our members of Parliament. So basically that's what Parliament has been doing. Of course, we have been increasing the number of researchers to assist MPs, but still we need capacitation in that area so that they're able to support our members of Parliament to provide evidence when debating. That's how Parliament has been doing it.
Okay.
It can come along as well if he wants to add anything.
So maybe I see there are two more comments there. We'll attend to those ones in the other discussion. Maybe let's move on so that we might have more ample time to be talking about strategic things, the way forward, in as far as how we can make or we can accentuate M&E in Zim, either in government, civil society, and so on. So now what I want to talk about is the issue of systems, and I speak especially to national evaluation systems. Why? Because this in Africa, we have what we call first generation national evaluation systems, which is Benin, Uganda, and South Africa. And there are other systems that are also starting to develop in terms of evaluation systems. Yes, there are M&E systems, but the balance is not, there's no balance in terms of monitoring and evaluation. There's more emphasis in terms of monitoring that evaluation. So there is a need now to look at the evaluation system. Hence, I choose to talk about evaluation systems here. And you find that with the need to demonstrate results in Africa and even globally, you find that these evaluation systems are becoming prominent. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals and how they are being propelled, you find that there is a need for country-owned, country-focused evaluation systems so that we are able to track the progress or lack of progress of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that emanates from the fact that the MDGs themselves were not achieved or partially achieved as a result of the failure of the implementation science. I think that's the greatest challenge that we see in these Sustainable Development Goals, vice versa, the MDGs. We might be having everything in place, but the implementation science is also what is lacking. Hence, states, they might take maybe SDG 1, 2, 3, and 5 for this year. Then they review, they provide a voluntary national review for that in the high political forum for that year. Then another year they choose other SDGs. So really, I want to zoom into the issue of systems thinking, in that by looking at the parts of a system, we miss to understand the whole of the system. One might be looking at one element of the system, as you can see in that animation there. One is on top, the other one was on the leg, the other one on the trunk, but they don't really see the elephant as a whole or as a system, because there, once the trunk is no longer working, the whole system is going to actually collapse. So it really calls for a systems thinking when we now look into the issue of use of evidence, because there are various components that comes into play, like one was saying, populism, politics, and also the availability of resources, either human or M&E infrastructure, like improvement plans and so on. So when you look into the systems thinking, it helps us to really move the focus away from what events are happening, patterns of behavior, which are symptoms fundamentally, and towards a systemic structure and the underlying mental models. So you find that at top there, we have got things that are being seen. People are saying, oh, the parliament is not using evidence. We are always, as the civil society, giving them the data that we have monitored. We're giving them citizen-based monitoring data. We are giving them our evaluation, but nothing is moving in terms of policy making or policy establishment. Yet there are many things that come into play when it comes to that. These are patterns of behavior. One was talking about values, right? Then one would talk about norms and the need to shift those so that we change the way things happen. At the same time, we should be embedding learning and making sure that we leverage some of those things. So that really gives us a sense into why is it sometimes we present the best evidence and then there's nothing, or nothing is gaining traction. So really, what is a system? It is a set of things that are working together as parts of a mechanism or an interconnecting network or a complex whole. So you find that these systems, especially these monitoring and evaluation systems, number one, they embed practice. Number two, they ensure that there is systematization. Number three, they ensure that there is institutionalization. So it speaks to the issues of consistency, depersonalizes processes. Like there are those people who are attached to their own kind of thinking only, and they are the ones who always influence the policy, but the processes. Once we have got a system in place, we know that the system prescribes this, therefore we are supposed to go with the system or with the processes of the system. So when one wants to define what an evaluation system is, it exists when evaluations are no longer commissioned on ad hoc basis, but there are more permanent arrangements that has been put in place to make sure that there is a supply of evaluative information, to make sure that there is demand as well, and to make sure that there is use of what has been generated. And this is not to say that evaluation evidence is the big brother of evidence. No, there are other evidences like your research, like your systematic reviews, and so on, which are very much important in as far as decision making. Like the last speaker is saying that in Parliament we've got researchers. I know in South Africa there are researchers, there are content developers, content advisors, then there's an M&E section. But most of the information that they feed to the parliamentary portfolios is information that is based on desktop reviews. And in the book that we are writing now in terms of use of evidence in parliaments, in my research with the South African Parliament, they are saying that the information that they receive or that they get to give parliamentary portfolios is information from desktop reviews. But how recent is that information? And how then that information can be treated as information which is usable at a particular point in time? Then it also calls into how the parliament itself can start to work with other people who are knowledge brokers, who are able to feed more recent information so that it is used. So when you look at the evaluation system itself, it is associated with the political and administrative system. Yes, we cannot tease the issue. We cannot run away from the issue of politics and the administrative system and how it is configured and how it can be reconfigured even when another political party comes into. Then it is intertwined with the values, practices, and institutions. Then it recognizes both the supply and the demand, the capacity within the system for individuals and institutions to use information. Believe you me, once we have the capacity and the buy-in to start using the information, things will start to gain traction. Hence, it is upon us to popularize the issue of use of evidence. And as the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results, we're really pushing hard in terms of how we can make sure that evidence is used or information is used. There are so many types of evaluation systems, and it also brings into play the notion that when people think about evidence use, they should not think about it at the end when it is produced. They should think about it at the diagnosis stage. How then do we use the information that we'll be collecting? So it becomes a system in itself rather than a system at the end to say that now we have got this kind of evidence. How do we use this evidence? But continuously, we have got the evidence being produced and it's being used. And one tricky of using evidence that I have found very much pertinent is inclusion of the people who are making decisions into the steering committees, into the technical committees, to make sure that they own the process. Even when you establish the evaluation questions, they are there to say, us as politicians, we would want to know this. Us as organization would want to know this. So they are able to come up with their own kind of evaluation questions. So in terms of the types, what I can tell you is that we can have a Zimbabwe country M&E system that is at a national level, hosted maybe in the OPC, if I'm correct. But at sector ministries, we've got other systems which are working in silo with the national one, or partially in silo with the national one. By that, I mean that the system there has got its own kind of a policy, has got its own frameworks, has got its own evaluation agendas, and so on. These are things that makes the system. And it has got its own kind of processes in as far as how the evidence will be used. So the types of systems, they are very much different. They are formalized and informal systems, but the formal systems, with what I know, is that there is a policy that is established. In Uganda, there's a policy. In South Africa, there's a policy. In Ghana, there is a draft policy. In Kenya, there's a draft policy. And these systems, they are actually titled differently. If you go up in East Africa, in Kenya, We have got the M&E department under National Treasury and Planning. They've got the National Integrated Monitoring and Evaluation System at a national level. Then they've got county integrated M&E system. Maybe that's their provinces, if you would want to equate that into our Zim scenario. So these are different systems, but sometimes these systems, they are not working in unison. They work actually in silos. And then we've got decentralized systems, which is what I also described. It can be formalized, it can be informal. And you find that when we have got this centralized system, we have got one institution, not only an institution, but a capable institution with ability to coordinate and provide oversight of the public sector M&E system, or even an evaluation system. For instance, in South Africa, we have the Department for Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, which provides oversight for that. If you go to Tanzania, their M&E system in the president's office, there is a department which is Public Service Management and Good Governance, provides that. If you go to Ghana, there is Ministry of Monitoring and Evaluation. It's a ministry on itself. If you go closer home to Zambia, you find that there is a monitoring and evaluation department under Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Development and Planning. So they are different in terms of their nature and form. Some are ministries, some are departments. If you go up there in Namibia, you find that they've got National Planning Commission. All these are the ones that provide oversight at national level. Closer home again in Botswana, they also have in Botswana as a policy, and the National Planning Office is the one that provides oversight for that. So there is decentralization, there is also centralization. Back here in South Africa, you find that the provincial government under the COGTA, Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, also has a role to play in as far as embedding and entrenching the system. Office of the Premier also have its own kind of role. So you find that there are sectoral evaluation systems. I can tell you that maybe in Zim, Ministry of Health has got good evaluations, maybe because of the funding from the donors and so on. Then also project methodology evaluation systems, you'd look at 3IE, which really looks into impact evaluations. So the systems can coexist within one major system. They can really work together, feed into each other, but what we find in countries is that they are working in silos. And zooming into the issue of systems, when you look into South Africa and Uganda, I draw from these characteristics of the National Evaluation System from Hoover, and there are 6 characteristics. And these 6 characteristics are important in as far as shaping how the system actually works. In terms of a policy, under the policy, there might be an evaluation plan which looks into the evaluations of flagship programs that might have emanated from the National Development Plan. Then they also distinctify between what is monitoring and what is evaluation, so that the public service personnel are able to make a discernible link with what they do and how they can implement the policy. There's an issue of autonomy and impartiality. There's an issue of feedback, which is very much important in as far as how do we make sure that what is happening in the civil society, what is happening in the academia, higher education institutions, what is happening in the government sector, what is happening in the private sector and the think tanks. How do we harmonize the information that they are collecting, and how do we use it optimally for the development of the country. And importantly, the issue of aligning planning and budgeting. It is, the utility of monitoring and evaluation almost relies on the extent to which systems for collecting data, synthesizing that data, analyzing that data, and reporting that data, and using that data are integrated into systems for policy making, planning, learning, and adaptation. So if then these are working in silos, it becomes a problem. But there should be a dependence on these systems. Hence, people, they also speak of the need for MIS kind of information, where information can be harmonized. And M&E, like I said, often treated as adjuncts to policy, program, and project implementation. But to add real value, they need to be integrated on the onset into management planning, decision-making processes, and components of institutional systems. Like one person was saying that we capacitate institutionally, systems, and individually. So at an institutional systems level, we need to now synergize policy, program, project implementation with policy making, planning, learning, and adaptation. The other characteristic is methodology. Most of these are policies or systems. You find that there is a selection of indicators, the selection criteria of what to be evaluated, there's priority setting, methodologies, and data collection. For instance, obviously, there is quantitative and qualitative methodologies. But in terms of evaluation as methodologies, these national evaluation policies in countries, they speak to different evaluations that needs to be done at different times. For instance, if you would come to South Africa, it outlines 6 evaluation types, right? And they are based on the 14 outcomes. But now there are about 7 outcomes. And then there's organization, coordination, oversight, the importance of statistical office, line ministries, decentralized levels, and so on. Then we've got the issue of capacity, which I think almost each and every African countries acknowledges that the capacity is not there. Is not there in the public sector. I think the private consultancies, we've got a lot of capacity. And when we say capacity, mostly the supply is fine, but there isn't really much on the demand side. How do the senior people interpret and use the information that we collect? And how do we package the evidence that we produce in a manner that is usable for people who are always busy? So capacity building plans are very much important in a country to make sure that there is ability to continuously upskill people so that they are able to grapple with whatsoever new that comes in place. Participation of outside stakeholders like your parliament, civil society, and donors. Then the issue of quality and use. So really, this is what is going on in South Africa, Uganda. We can also put in Zim there and try to look at those components, their availability. So in terms of the issue of use, it is important to note that the countries that have selected here, they are now really focusing on how do we use the evaluations. Hence, most of them, they are moving towards rapid evaluations. And you find that the findings are always, not always, they are presented within platforms like workshops. You can go to the DPME website. You can look at the number of evaluations that they've done. You can look at the improvement plans and so on. Then importantly, you find that evaluation findings are presented to the cabinet, which gives weight to the implementation, the use. Once we start having processes, for instance, policies that dictates clearly and deliberately that evaluations are supposed to be presented at this platform, and this platform decides what to be used and when and by who and by what time, then it becomes important. So that is that, but that comparison of use, it just shows you how these countries in terms of use, how they are gaining traction in Benin, Uganda, and South Africa. This was an article that was published by one of my colleagues, Ian Goldman, in terms of what is really happening in terms of use. But of course, importantly, if you look on the right side there, it is unrealistic to expect that the availability of evidence will always give rise to policy decisions that are completely rational and objective. Why do we say so? Because there are many factors that influences how evidence will be used. Politics, capacity, availability of valid and reliable evidence, and importantly, in the politics cycles, where that evidence is coming from. So I will not waste time on that. So I am just laying a background for the system. Then I'll get to the issue at the end of evidence use. Then we can start to talk and questions and comments and experiences. That is what really I value most than just presenting the slide. So in South Africa, there has been what we call an evaluation of national evaluation system, and there is an underlying theory of change of that system. And if you look into the outcomes, there's much to do with evidence, how evaluation recommendations are funded, improvement plans, how they are monitored, evaluation and research evidence shared, enhance the capacity to manage use of evaluation and research evidence, until we have public services become more effective and poverty is eradicated. So this is very much important in as far as having this as an operational plan or story, in as far as how do we embed the use of evidence. And I've said initially, evidence is not going to be thought of at the end. It has to be thought of when a program is actually starting. Even the system itself does not need to take cognizance of evidence at the later end, but he has to lay inputs and activities that makes sure that evidence will be used, like capacitation of political elites, capacitation of senior administrative people, capacitation of our parliamentarians, so that when they are in their portfolio committees or when they are in their Senate and National Assembly, they've got enough knowledge and skills in as far as interpreting what is coming out. So it is important to have policies, it is important to have guidelines, it is important to have quality assessment and standards. It is important that these are reviewed, because if the evidence is not of quality, it has a bearing on the use. So you would actually find out that the other book that we wrote on M&E African landscape, I have a chapter which talks to appraising qualitative evaluations, and I also speak to the issues of use. If this pandemic ends, I may be able to bring some copies in Harare and give it to Zia to distribute. In terms of the national evaluation system in South Africa, this is how it is actually configured. And of course, a number of guidelines, they've already passed that, training courses and so on, even the evaluations that have been conducted. And some of them are being put to suitable use. So before maybe we go to the discussion, let me just speak to this because I see this as an important or breeding grounds which are important in order for M&E to be seen as useful and M&E to be useful, which are two different things. We've got the vision of the leadership. How does the leadership in their talk and in their social discourse talk about the issue of evidence, the issue of evaluation, or the issue of monitoring? Do we have an enabling environment in Zim which calls upon evaluations to be used, research to be used, and so on? Do we have any policies, legislations which back up that? Do we have the political will to actually change? What is the pace of the development of the M&E infrastructure? Your evaluation agendas, your capacity building plans, your M&E frameworks, your M&E country strategy for implementation of national development plans, capacity to demand and use, and the capacity to supply that M&E. These are very important because if we do not have the supply, the use will be affected. If the use issue is not addressed, the supply will keep on supplying without actually using the findings. So this is just the concluding remarks in terms of the systems, that there's a stronger focus on the M than on the E, lack of acceptance and resistance to evaluation. How do we then address that? Evaluation seen as secondary to program implementation and monitoring, lack of evaluators, especially in the public sector, and ensuring that evaluations are followed up and the recommendations are implemented and not as compliance. The most important thing is to make sure that there are improvement plans. And in South Africa, I know that there are follow-ups in terms of that. And the system has to be aligned to National Development Plan and Made in Africa kind of response to our own problems. When you look at how the monitoring and evaluation is actually done in these African countries, you can see that there's a lot of mimicry in terms of how the Global North systems has been configured. But instead, there is need now for African countries to have systems, either M&E systems or evaluation systems, which responds to the needs of the African people, which in later on inform the development trajectory for Africans. And by Africans, it calls upon the decolonization of even the monitoring and evaluation curriculum, that we should now start to make sure that our M&E is context relevant. I think also the universities now needs also to make sure that we are not often fed on staple food from the Global North in terms of monitoring and evaluation, but we do have our own kind of materials that are African informed that we are using. So I think on that note, maybe we can have a little discussion. I see now it's almost 25 to 12, so maybe we can spend 5 minutes, but I see already on the charts there are some comments there.
Yes, Dr. Chirao. There's also a request that we could have a 5-minute break.
Sure.
And then after the 5 minutes, we can then come in with our comments and questions. Or during the 5-minute break, we can also request participants to put some questions on the chat so that we do not spend a lot of time asking those questions when we come back. So looking at the time, it's 11:35. We can resume at 11:40.
Okay.
Okay.
A monitoring plan that should be implemented. As I speak in our ministry, we haven't started to implement the monitoring plans. So that is what is happening.
So before you go, in terms of the policy that you have alluded to, does it recognize the insufficiency of capacity to the extent that it will be able now to push forward for enhancement of that capacity through maybe having a capacity strengthening plan which will be rolled out to all the ministries so that we can capacitate these people? Does it talk to that?
Yes, the policy there is
Okay.
policy implementation guideline booklet document that is also comprehensive.
Okay.
It also recognizes and it encompasses that. Then you asked in terms of the evidence or evaluation. Yeah, the policy stated that there should be at least one evaluation to be conducted by each ministry beginning this year. So in my ministry, we also have embedded a program that should be evaluated this year. So the work now is on convincing the top management that we really need to comply and do an evaluation, not as compliance as you have been saying earlier on, but also to generate evidence around an identified program.
Okay, so the best way that you might need to do is not to go too much on the high level, like your outcome or whatsoever, just to do maybe a process implementation that is easier to just get buy-in. Then later on you can do these bigger ones, because people are always afraid of being accountable. So hence evaluations are seen as policing, but what is important is the component of learning, which I think also the policy should zero in terms of how monitoring and evaluation enhance learning on what works for whom, why, and under what circumstances. Thanks.
Okay.
So should we move, Nodumo? Are we what time are we supposed to end? 12:30.
12:30, yes.
Okay, let's just talk about this. Then we can finalize and have maybe a discussion on what the way forward, what we really need to look into, like more strategic conversation, in terms of how we can move M&E in government and outside government. So I want to look at the supply and demand of M&E evidence, and it's very interesting in the M&E context that supply refers to those who produce evidence, while demand means those who use M&E products and services. But in government-led evaluation systems, policymakers, program leaders could be thought as representing the demand side, with the evaluation consultants on the supply side. However, one could think of supply as the donor agency who require evaluations to be done on programs that they run in partner countries. like USAID, maybe DFID, INZIM, UNICEF. And therefore, donors often work with both the supply and the demand. So you don't really know whether this one is a supply or is on the demand side. So you find that within the center that I work for, like I said, some of you might be knowledgeable about it. We have a secretariat of Twentembele, which is a network of countries seeking to improve M&E systems so that they contribute to better governance and accountability. And in 2018, we did a 3-country case study on supply and demand, and reviewed that the nature of demand for and supply of M&E goods and services really vary widely depending on a country's context. For example, in Benin, which was one of the countries, the demand is really driven by donors, whereas government largely drives demand in South Africa. So that is really a different kind of scenario. And I would want to presume that in Zimbabwe as well, the case is that the donors are the ones who really drive the demand for evaluations and less of government. Although some of the projects might be integrated in the sector ministries, I believe that most of them, they are integrated in the sector ministries. So what you find from the studies very, very interesting. You can look for it online. So in terms of the supply and demand, this is what I've been touching on. The supply might be universities, might be think tanks, might be evaluation association and networks, private consultancies, civil society organizations, and government ministries, departments, and agencies. But what is important to note as well in this kind of categorization that I have on the supply side is how these, especially the civil society and government, do not really work together because of mistrust and suspicion, and because also of what governments might term as regime change and so on. So there's really need to be a way of making sure that we collaborate, civil society organizations, in terms of how they can feed M&E information to government, and how they can actually, help the government in terms of making available valid, reliable, and quality data, which the government can tap into. I can tell you that I am doing a program in Uganda with Office of the Prime Minister, the NGO department, in as far as how can we make sure that the government, through the OPM and the Ministry of Health and the civil society organization working in the health sector, how can they work together for the benefit of the country, rather than to see always issues of accountability. The government is not doing this, the civil society is doing this, therefore is campaigning for someone. But how do we optimally work together? So that's one program that I'm doing in Uganda. We've done that in Ghana as well, and South Africa, and they are coming on board in as far as how do we make sure that we optimize the strengths and the weaknesses of each other. Then the demand side, you can see for yourself that the government is there, the civil society is there, and if need be, I can share with you our AFRED database, which hosts quite a number of evaluations from different countries, from different donors. And we have written a book, like I said, and we still continue to tap on that. And you can see for yourself that most of these evaluations, the people that are actually doing the evaluations, they are not the people from within the country. If there are people from within the country, they are relegated to become data collectors. And then how does that lead to non-utilization? Because sometimes the people who might come might not be knowledgeable about the context and also the values and norms and so on. So that really has a bearing, and that needs also to be addressed, to work with people who are knowledgeable about the context so that the utilization becomes also easy. But however, what happens when you have a low demand and high supply? Those people who studied economics, they know this very much. Inadequate capacity from the demand side to interpret and ask the right policy questions is a challenge. We might have findings, give them to our ministers, give them to our permanent secretaries and DPSs, but if they do not understand or interpret the information correctly, it becomes a problem. I am happy to hear about that executive dashboard, which I think it will be in simplified language, which these people who are always busy are able to conceptualize and pick the key points that needs to be addressed. And also the importance of packaging the evidence into readable formats. Like you find that in South Africa, there is a format that they use for evaluations when they are packaged to be read by the ministers and the other people who are high level, like they call it 1/525 format. So it is a very good format which enables people to just browse the summary and be able to pick the information that they might need. And also the issue of having policy briefs, which are short and straight to the point. How then do we make sure that given the situation that we are in of high teenage pregnancy, these are the evaluation findings, what policy can we put in place? If that is the policy for also early child marriages, what can we put in place emanating from the findings? But you find that there is quite unbalanced emphasis, little demand and plenty of supply. So sources of evidence, there are so many sources of evidence, and the role of research and evaluation and other sources of information is very important, but debates between researchers and evaluators about the superiority and the inferiority of evaluations and research designs are not really productive at this point in time, especially in these days when people are talking about how can we make sure that we harmonize the kind of evidence that we receive. So it also needs some emphasis on how we can optimize on the strengths of evaluations and on the strengths of evaluations, and also making sure that we have quality evidence, because these debates about different research designs, evaluation designs, and the sources, rather than epistemological competition, really leads to poor evidence, or to evidence that is technically good, but of little use to policymakers and anyone else. So these debates really, they need to be sidelined, and we really need to look at the strengths and weaknesses of different kind of sources of evidence. For example, what I have here are systematic reviews, which I think everyone knows about systematic reviews, that these are existing evidences that are accorded such high premium amongst the people who contends for evidence policy making and practice, because they overcome the shortcomings of single studies, because they are systematic reviews, they take from different sources. So single studies and evaluations can provide really an unbalanced and unrepresentative view of total available evidence on the topic. So most of the people who are the proponents for evidence-based policy making, they will really push for the systematic reviews. If you go to African Center for Evidence is at the University of Johannesburg, they've got a center there which are gurus in terms of evidence gap maps, systematic reviews, and so on. So these are just debates in as far as, you know, which one is superior and so on. Then there are single studies and evaluations, which are commonly used to support government policy and practice rather than systematic reviews. So you can see that there are advantages and there are disadvantages of each. Indeed, a majority of the research and evaluation that are undertaken on behalf of government and development communities, they are really fundamentally single studies or evaluations. And these are often undertaken without any accumulation of existing evidence through systematic review methodology. But at the same time, I would argue that there are people, when we do evaluations, we really zoom into also the gray literature and the other available literature to inform the evaluation. So we try to see from different sources of information. Then there are pilot studies and case studies. And you find that pilot and case studies, they really provide other sources of evidence for policy and policy implementation. Like I know in the UK Cabinet Office, they recommend that they really use these pilot studies. But the evidence that is collected from pilot studies, I don't know if you'd agree with me on my assertion, is that the evidence is one, selective, and is not subjective to a careful, critical, and risk assessment. Can also lead to inappropriate kind of courses of action, which may cause more harm because it is only based on one selected case study. Hence, people who speak about generalization, they say that the only generalization is that there's no generalization because these are case studies. They cannot be applied to other instances because the context on the other particular areas might be different. Then we also have what we call expert evidence. There are so many types of sources of this evidence. The expert ones, expert opinion, is commonly used to support government policy and practice. For instance, right now, in the era that we are of the novel coronavirus, there is a lot of expert evidence in discussions in as far as can we continue with lockdown, can we ease the regulations, and people they are taking from expert evidence things that might have happened in China and Italy, they are now being transferred to see if that can also work, maybe by opening up the economy and so on. So expect evidence is also a basis for decision making, policy making, but also raises important questions around selectivity of knowledge and expertise. Because like really in the COVID-19 situation we are in, we really need a triangulation of information to make sure that we arrive at a plausible kind of decision. So there is also internet evidence, which most of us, we are accessing these days. If you go to Twitter, you read so much about what had happened either in South Africa or in Zimbabwe. So that's another kind of evidence. Then it brings to the point that another person raised earlier on in terms of trade-offs. Out of all these kind of sources of evidence which are put on board, which one do we really say this is the actual we are going to go with? And that really raises important questions. I'm not going to get into the discussion now, probably what we need to do is to just move to this section, and we will have a discussion. Maybe I'll spend about 5 to 10 minutes on this, then we can go to the discussion in terms of the role of evidence in Parliament. So I think it is really an important ingredient for parliamentarians to deliver their mandate, that they should be able to use evidence in their oversight, in their legislation, in their representation, and how they also increase the quality of governance in terms of transparency, accountability, representing the citizens' interests. So MPs cannot effectively exercise their oversight role without credible evidence, because that might also give a harm than actually solve the problem. So you find that evidence is not always used in decision making for many other reasons, which we discuss here. So if you look at the role of evaluative evidence in parliaments or in any other kind of organization, you can have instrumental evidence, you can have conceptual evidence, you can have process as well. So when you look into these kind of the role that it can play, you can find that there are some strengths and some weaknesses in the implementation. For instance, if you look at the instrumental decisions, you can find that one advantage is that the decisions are made based on evidence that is available. But one of the challenges is that there are other factors that can be brought about in a program, either to discontinue a policy or a program and so on. So this, they can be shared with you in terms of the role of evaluation evidence, instrumental, conceptual, and the symbolic. Right, this was just a picture that I took on one of the newspapers here in South Africa, Times Lives, which was an issue about evidence, how people now are grappling with the availability of the best evidence in place in order for our children to be sent back to school. So the full title of that was "Safe to Send Children Back, What Science Can Provide." So now really people are looking into what is the available evidence to say that we can send our children to school. And they are saying that the evidence from Europe is showing that children of less than 15 years of age, only maybe 0.09% of those have died. The rest have been able to sustain the symptoms, and they are going back to normal after a couple of days. So these are some of the things now the ministers and our other political elites are using to actually inform the decision in as far as sending children back to school. It really just zooms into the issue of how evidence is important in order to pass decisions. So I'm just now rushing so that we will be able to have all the people on the discussion, but the issue of complexity of using evidence, the problem here is there are external influencers in general. You can use this in general or in parliament. What is the significance of the policy? What is the political and cultural environment? How is power distributed and how are decisions made? Had a bearing on evidence use. So these are some of the things that they take into consideration. With the majority in the parliament, obviously when they vote, you find that the majority will always win. Then there are institutional influencers of use, like institutional environment. We have competent leadership who has got the knowledge and who also value evidence use within a wider context? Do we have evidence champions? For instance, parliamentarians should become the champions of evidence. They should be the ones who saying that we need evidence in order to inform this policy, in order to inform this decision making, either in lockdown, either in schools, either in health, and so on. And these evidence champions are not always senior leadership positions. It can be anyone on this platform. So it is upon us to start popularizing the use of evidence to people who are in highest decision making bodies. And you find that in a study that was done in this book that we have written, 25 to 33 of managers do not have skills to understand and use evaluation recommendations. So it goes really upon us to filter what are the causes for not using evaluation. We've done so many of these researches in terms of why they are not using it. I'll be able to share with you as well. And there are articles that have been written in African Evaluation Journal. Then appropriate structures and processes are also important in as far as how we can use evidence. And organizational culture. Is there a culture of using evidence within the people that are around? So it is really a question of chicken and egg scenario. Either we need a culture before we have appropriate structures and processes in place. But I think it is upon the people to do what is right, to be able to transform the lives of people and improve service delivery by taking the best available evidence and using it in tandem with other evidences that they might have, like also experiential evidence. Some other politicians, they boast that they've got experiential evidence. This policy has never worked. This program has never worked. I've been in politics for the last 55 years. So we really need also to take into consideration such. Really, there are so many of factors that affect this, which I've been talking about from one of my colleagues who has produced this framework in terms of understanding what other factors can affect that. We can share that. Then also there is another kind of an ecosystem of evidence use that we have developed in the book that we are writing. All these are issues that actually affect how evidence is used in parliament. If you look at the external structures, the executive, you see the system itself, statistical agencies, ministries, your regional bodies, your donors, and so on. Then the political contexts, historical colonial legacy, journey to democracy. These are all things that affect decision making. So people should not be surprised when they put best available evidence in parliament, then they say, let's go with this. Yet there are so many other issues that need to be taken into consideration. And also the issues of where the parliament also draws its kind of evidence. Like we said, the other participants said that there is a research unit, but maybe the researchers are not enough. I know in South Africa, there might be one researcher per each parliamentary committee, portfolio committee. So that really is not enough, because you need to do robust research to influence policy, decision making, and so on. So how then do we ensure that we use evidence? There is a need for a number of strategies. You can look at the cartoon. The M&E, remember, M&E information is usable only if it is used. So in terms of how to ensure evidence, in the book that we had edited by Ian and Mine, this is what actually would help us to now think about how can we make sure that evidence is used, what is needed from the supply side and what is needed from the evaluation side, and the importance of knowledge brokers who really address both the supply and the demand side. Accessibility of evidence, relevant knowledge, credible and timely. Remember what I said about rapid evaluations. Then on the demand side, demand for evidence and learning, asking the right policy questions, capability to use that evidence, having critical and analytical thinking, interpretation of evidence, and knowledge of the problem. Hence the importance of including these people who make decisions in the process of program monitoring and evaluation. Then supportive and sustainable structures, evaluation and research infrastructure, effective networks with VOPs, knowledge management and sharing. So these are some of the issues that I would have spoken to in-depthly, but we are now, I think, running out of time, but I'll be able to share the slides as being said on the chat box. So this is what I was talking about, some of the infrastructure that is there in South Africa to make sure that there is use of evidence, your policy briefs, your learning notes, your blogs, your formatting of the reports and so on, improvement plans and actionable recommendations. So these are some of the things that we're trying to make sure that the evaluation findings or evidence in ministries, departments, and agencies are going to use evidence. So some of the lessons that we have learned, or that I have learned, some of my colleagues in terms of evidence use, is to build on in the unique integration of M&E within the broader context of evidence use in parliaments. I know in parliaments there are processes that are followed in making decisions. Like I said earlier on, there is a need really to integrate monitoring, evaluation, planning to these processes and systems of making decisions and other components of institutional systems. Address the deeper contextual, political, and ideological factors within peripheral and technical and logistical factors. There's really need to talk about why would politics influence decisions in countries. For some of you who are knowledgeable about what is going on in Lesotho, you can see how politics is driving the development trajectory of the country. And it's also proving to be difficult for our work in the country as well. Unpack and build on key mechanisms triggering change: ability, awareness, and interaction. We need really to bring also our MPs on board to be able to have peer-to-peer learning with other MPs from other countries and see how they are able to use evidence from research, evidence from evaluation, and really provide case studies where evidence has been used and where that evidence is now, or a policy or a decision is now changing or transforming service delivery or people's well-being. Strategically scale up the capacity initiatives, reach more strategic participants, align the parliamentary cycles, develop longer-term programs combining different approaches. And I'm sure that in the Parliament of Zim, I think last year in March, when we were in Côte d'Ivoire, the Speaker Honorable Mdenda was there, and about 6 parliamentarians who also attended one of my trainings on systems and use. And that really works to have those people as some of the strategic people whom we should task with the responsibility of propelling and popularizing the evidence from research and M&E. Build on the value of regional peer learning. I've said that the ability of UpNode to do so, orient leadership on the importance of strengthening evidence use, and integrate and support application and transfer, and the issue of reflection, learning, and improving approaches. It's unfortunate that some of the things I was not able to really zoom into deeply because of the time. But I think this ends the presentation for today. People might, I'm not so sure, Chair, either people need to bring in their kind of experiences and questions, or if we can maybe have a guided discussion which people can zoom into, so that we are able to formulate our way forward in as far as how best can we build a culture of using evidence in ZIM. Over.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chiral. We can have people share their experiences briefly and then have a guided discussion, seeing that we are already rounding off. Okay. But I also want to highlight that we do have a comment on our chat section from Dr. Shylock, and also a question that we could look into before we go ahead and open to plenary. Okay. I'll just read through it.
Okay.
Okay. The research designs cannot be ignored, as these form the basis for quality evidence. We have in the market reports that do not provide any substantive evidence because of the laxity in methods. Personally, I find there is need for refinement of tools to produce evidence. For example, early anthropological work was harmful to most cultures because the methods were overly subjective. At minimum, there has to be a rigorous application of mixed methods. And the question is, are these types of evidence or sources of evidence?
Okay, so thanks, was that Doc Muyengwa for that assertion. I do subscribe to your assertion that most of the methods, or most of the methods and tools, they really need refinement to produce evidence which is valid and so on. I'm not so sure either it is about the tools or either it is about the system being able to instigate mechanisms for verifiability and mechanisms for checking standards. I know some other countries, they've got quality standards and quality frameworks to which they subject these findings. So it is not about the tools. I think you can have a good tool, but the interpretation of findings from a good tool might be also problematic. And of course, these early anthropological work were very harmful. I do agree with you there about their subjectivity instead of objectivity. But now, yes, we need to really zoom into how can we use mixed methods to be able to complement and substitute any of the methods that are used. That really makes the research and evidence robust when we use both the combination of quantity and qualitative. But of course, these are sources of evidence. They qualify as sources of evidence, and they also qualify as types of evidence. If you look into the systematic reviews, as I was saying, they qualify both sides, but of course that is open to debate within the people who are fundis of methodologies. Over.
No, Dumo, just for the benefit of the doc and the participants as well, you will recall that in 2019, I think ZIA did commission a study on evaluation practice in ZIM, which looked at the issues that the presenter was perhaps speaking to, looking at the environment for evaluation demand as well as supply. So I just thought that the participants may want to have a look at the report. It's got some useful information. It's online, and I'm sure it's on the ZIA website as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Manikai. We do have the situation analysis online on our website. It also touches on the culture of evaluation in Zimbabwe, what types of evaluations are being conducted by CSOs, and quite a number of areas. So yes, thank you for highlighting that.
I think also what is important is the issue of leadership in M&E, that it plays a critical role in a system. Because for monitoring and evaluation to realize their potential, they also require inspired leadership, at different levels. And such leadership should drive both monitoring as a managerial function and evaluation as a strategic function, and highlighting the value that evidence-based decision-making offers in the context of competing and conflicting priorities, which I think is always a problem when it comes to decision-making. So unfortunately, that's not the case with M&E, which is often seen as an administrative function at the service of political agendas, conflict at political, administrative, and often, where there is a genuine attempt by state officials to drive programs of authenticity, reflection, and adaptation, then you find there is always a problem, like the other participant who was saying that it is up to them now to really get buy-in from the top management. There might be a genuine attempt to see authenticity, reflection, lessons, but people would always see it as a witch hunt. So I really think issues of leadership also need to be taken into consideration, and we should have people who value monitoring and evaluation in interaction with other management systems that might be in place, like your auditing and so on. So I don't know how best can we now promote this culture of using evidence. I say ZIA because in a number of countries that I'm working in, I see the VOP in this sense, ZIA, as a midwifery with the ability to bring on board all the stakeholders in the M&E wider ecosystem on board, and which acts as a convener to promote the culture of using evidence. How can they promote that in government, in parliament, and in civil society organization? I am cognizant of the fact that the other participant had said the civil society is also working in that space, but without competing against each other, how do we harmonize these efforts for making sure that the drive towards promoting of culture is being realized in the country?
I think this is now open to everyone to share what our opinions are. I would want to ask Dr. Shylock to give us an overview of what we have been doing in ZIA to maybe start the ball rolling.
Thanks, Nondo. I think I will not go in that direction. The first thing I think we need to ask is how much time do we have left on this call so that we can prioritize items on the provided on the list. Not more, how much time?
Okay, sorry, I'm still muted. We started, I think, at around 9:45. Could we give it another 15 minutes since this is 12:33?
Okay, that's fine. So for me, I think as Monica pointed, we have a situational assessment report which touches on most of these issues in terms of what ZIA can do to enhance the culture of M&E. So that broadly provides us a framework for doing this. But I'd be happy if we can focus on parliamentary systems, considering that Eval is here. I think Patrick, the other guy has left from Parliament. And I think it's also within the context of this task that we asked Dr. Rao to prepare and guide us. So I would be interested in Parliament. Why? Also because ZIA has got an MOU with the Parliament of Zimbabwe, which we basically need to operationalize and start itemizing specific capacities we need to start building both within the Parliament, among the parliamentarians and the Secretariat itself. Not only that, but as you are also currently doing, which is to strengthen the CSOs, including the association itself, in being able to deal with evidence use in parliamentary systems. As we've learned today, it's not an easy process, it's not a one-way process. It's got a lot of complexities. So as associations, CSOs, all here present, we also need that guidance and learning from other countries. So that's one action point in terms of instilling those lessons further for ZIA, for the CSOs who are here. Gilchrist is here. I think he's worked very closely with Parliament. So we're bringing all those experiences together. But within a focused framework of saying we're just looking at use of evidence and evaluating evidence. For Beverly, and I think what she really wants amplified issues of methodology. They would not want those scattered around because I think that's one of the key challenges they struggle with in terms of what methods generate the most credible evidence for any given context or any given problem at hand. If we cannot go the RCT route, which way do we go? And then they're also dealing with more complex situations, such as what you currently have, where you have to make decisions with very limited information or the information that's coming out of different situations and different contexts. So I think I'll be happy if our discussion can focus around that. It's unfortunate we did not share our MOU, but Beverly might be aware of what's also contained in the MOU between ZIA and Parliament, which basically provides not only ZIA but also other CSOs with a framework for formally engaging with Parliament, which is to formally institutionalize M&E within parliamentary systems. I'm glad, Dr. Taku, you've worked across the continent. We've also reached out to you as officially as peer to say we are really keen on going into this direction and we need your support. So I think this is the platform to sort of start narrowing the discussion into that space, to then allow ZIA and also the CSOs who are here to put together a concrete work plan, whether it's a proposal, but a plan of action in terms of what do we really need to do in order to push this forward. I think those are my quick thoughts. People are free to come in.
Thank you, Shylock. We can then open to the floor. Any comments, any questions, suggestions from what Dr. Shylock has shared? We have people from different CSOs. We still have Beverly Chinyama on board from the Parliament. So any quick reactions? Over.
So Beverly had raised the hand. You can just weigh in.
All right, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. All right, in terms of promoting the culture of using evidence for Parliament, like I indicated, we work with our researchers. We've been also working with civil society organizations to conduct technical like researches so that they go deep and they capacitate our members of Parliament so that they are able to present this, put recommendations to the executive. Also, just thinking that probably we need also to strengthen the link between Parliament and universities, because you find that, like you indicated, universities, they are on the supply side, they do a lot of research is full of evidence, but at times, because of the weak link between parliaments, some of these, they don't reach the parliamentarians who put recommendations to the executive. So we find that we need to strengthen this link so that we make use of that also, because I'm sure this is very useful, but it's not reaching the policymakers. So basically, that's what I wanted to say. As for Shylock, what you were saying, I wasn't really getting me, it was breaking. So probably you can type some of the things that he indicated. I didn't hear some of the issues that he raised.
Okay, thank you, Beverly. We also have a hand up from Cynthia.
Hi, thank you, Nodumo, and thank you, Dr. Chirao. Just an observation that some mics remain unmuted, so that's why it gives that feedback. So maybe, Nodumo, if you can mute Dr. Chirao. I think it was affecting Shylock's mic, just an observation. But there was a question from Shylock to Beverly, asking what evidence do you need at the moment? So asking you, Beverly, what type of evidence would you need from the parliamentary point of view? What type of evidence would you need, and how can we all assist as ZIA and other MNE practitioners? Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Beverly, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. For Parliament, some of the issues which are technical, like issues to do with illicit finance, some complicated issues there. I think we need evidence on such issues so that our members of Parliament can use that. Basically, those are some of the issues, some technical issues that some CSOs are well versed into. Even issues to do with gender budgeting, then those are some of the issues.
Can I just ask Beverly,
Yes.
in terms of the I don't know if in Zim you call them portfolio committees, and each portfolio committee has a researcher who is attached to that, who is doing research on the needs that are raised by the members in the portfolio committee. And now, when you say you'd want these technical CSOs to provide some of this data that would be technical, my question to you is, for these researchers who are working in different portfolio committees, say maybe health, say maybe finance, and so on, are these researchers general, or they are subject matter kind of kind of researchers, because my understanding is that, like here in South Africa, if someone is a researcher in the military and defense portfolio committee, that person really understands things to do with the military, perhaps was once a soldier at some point in time. So I just wanted to understand that.
All right, thank you. For our researchers, you find that some of the researchers, they are more like economists. They are well versed into research, but maybe in the subject areas they might not be well versed. So in terms of some technical issues, they might not be very well placed, like to assist. Of course, not like going deep. So in terms of our researchers, they need also capacitation, like I indicated, in terms of the numbers. We have like researchers, one researcher working with 2 portfolio committees. Recently, of course, we have had recruitment, but still, there are still new researchers who need to be capacitated. We are not too well versed. So in terms of the numbers, in terms of even the technical issues at hand, I still need for support for some of the issues.
Okay, thank you. I've noted that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We also have comment from on the chat group from Tsitima Kunike, who's a ZIA board member. She's highlighting that systems thinking is the way to go, given that M&E is a cross-cutting activity. She feels that as ZIA, we are best placed to collaborate with relevant stakeholders. And as Eziwe had pointed out, there is need for capacity building for most civil servants and parliamentarians. So that's her comment from her. I'd also want to highlight that we do have on board Onyas from Nango. Maybe Onyas could also share with us some experiences. We also tried to put up an MOU with Nango regarding capacity building in areas of M&E and how they can contribute to the government sector and the parliament. If he does have anything to share, Onyas. Okay.
Yeah, something just dawned on me, Nodumo. As I was doing a strategy for some NGO, something came through about an influencing strategy. And I think I know ZIA has a strategy, but I think as one of the key issues there, we should think about designing an influencing strategy.
So this one, I think, goes back again to Beverly in terms of the demand for evidence within the parliament. Do we have incentives or disincentives that are awarded to people who using or not using, so that probably we start to stimulate that kind of culture, knowing that there are incentives for that? Do we incentivize that in the parliament?
Sorry, maybe you can elaborate what you mean by like incentivizing to the MPs or what?
Yes, to the MPs, like, or even broader portfolio committee, if they are maybe a portfolio committee on health, they are taking on board evidence and they are tangible things that can show that this is as a result of evidence that has been used by portfolio committee. So is there any mechanism to honor those people who value evidence so that it starts to build momentum in other portfolio committees to use evidence, knowing that there are incentives, maybe for argument's sake, you might be given maybe $500 or you might be given a holiday or some leave days in Victoria Falls, just saying that as form of incentivizing.
Currently, we haven't done anything like that. Yeah, nothing has been done in line with that. To what I'm aware of, yes.
Okay, because some other countries really dwell on incentivizing those whom are using evidence, and those that then start to work as champions in using evidence, and that really trickles into other portfolio committees to ask the right policy questions and so on. So it's one thing, if resources permit, to look into how we can make sure that we can incentivize that. It shouldn't be like a big thing, but just a recognition to cultivate the culture.
All right, this is noted. Thank you.
Okay, looking at the chats, Dr. Chirao, there's one from Gilchrist, but I think it has been responded to by Beverly. He had said, do the values of government reflect and influence engagement with evidence?
So yeah, that I think we have spoken to.
Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure if Onyas is still with us. Okay, his hand is up. Yes. Onyas, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. So I will speak from the civil society side. I will share our experiences in monitoring and evaluation. So you find that the civil society here in Zimbabwe is not homogeneous. So by implication, we have different cultures, we have got different experiences, and we implement M&D in a lot of different ways. We have got big organizations that are well equipped, that have got capacities, and that are doing very well in doing monitoring and evaluation. But then you also find that we also have mostly local NGOs who are operating maybe at local level, who are required also to be doing monitoring and evaluation. And you find that as civil society, our M&E is two-pronged. We have to do monitoring and evaluation for our own programs and projects that we are doing, but we also find that we are also expected to do monitoring and evaluation for government programs. And oftentimes you find development partners who are supporting government also coming into civil society to ask us to play that watch to grow of monitoring government. So that's where you find that mostly local organizations lack the adequate capacity that is needed. And I really think that there is an opportunity for ZIA even to come in and support monitoring and evaluation. Is NANGO, which is the umbrella body for non-governmental organizations, we have been running trainings with our members to capacitate them on monitoring and evaluation. But then you find that in some cases, people change organizations, people leave jobs, and that gap is always there in our membership. So I think there's an opportunity for ZIA even to come in. And on the demand and supply of monitoring and evaluation, you find that even within an organization, you could be having an M&D officer, or you could be having an M&D manager, but he is a lone ranger there. All the other departments, maybe from finance, from even the programs, might not be appreciating the monitoring and the monitoring results that are coming, and that culture of learning might not be there within the organization. So I think the approach that we were discussing here, where capacity is not only needed from the supply side, where maybe in most organizations, it will be the M&D officer who is the supplier, when those who should be demanding it are not equipped. So I'm actually taking that approach, where I think we need to capacitate organizations as a whole, not just maybe one person or just a few people coming from the programs or from the M&E department. So I'm just looking at the questions that are there, that the guided discussions, and I can say on the partners, development partners have been helping a lot in strengthening our M&E systems, is even in the civil society. But I think there is scope for even government to come in to even support civil society, and even ZIA to come on board and strengthen the M&E systems in the civil society. And the more government demands this information, this M&E results from the civil society, giving us more spaces to show what we would have done and to share our experiences in monitoring even government programs, I'm sure it will help in even strengthening our role as civil society in monitoring government programs. I think that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Onyes. Over to you, Dr. Chirao.
I think Onyes really raised some good points. Like I said, we are doing some work in Uganda in as far as how government and civil society can work together optimally by using the evidence either produced by government or civil society in making sure that service delivery in health is reached. So it's one of the things that we need to cultivate in the spaces in ZIM between civil society and organization, because the issue of which hand is counterproductive. And I should attest that in the space of civil society and government collaboration, there are what we call invited versus invented spaces. And the invited spaces, there is not really problems, you know, in terms of the working relationship between government and the civil society, because those are sometimes even funded by government. But the invented spaces which the civil society organizations find themselves in, where they are mainly talking about issues of accountability of the government, issues of accountability of government to the citizens, then it becomes a problem. So we really need to make a balance in terms of how we can do that. And I think there is scope for that in ZIM, to leverage invited and invented spaces. And I see also, I think Dr. Meyengwa on the chat box was talking about the issue of including parliamentarians in the evaluation process from the onwards. I think this is very important, and when we have our technical or steering committees, we ought to have these parliamentarians also to be part of the process, so that they are there when we are having our evaluation questions, and when evaluations are actual, and when the findings are actually established, they can attest to say we were there in the field, we saw really with our eyes that this is not happening, we need to do this, therefore use those findings, other than to have them at the end. They don't even know the context of the evaluation. They don't even know who are the other affected stakeholders. So it is important that we include them in the evaluation process so that the utilization of evidence becomes possible. I'm trying also to read from Killian. One way of looking at it is for ZIA to work with NGOs in some constituencies that have conducted evaluations for their programs and present such evaluation results to the parliamentarian for the constituency. This will improve appreciation of evaluation. Can then use a few of these as champions in the right. So this is very important. In our language, we call it evaluation audit. We can do such kind of an evaluation of evaluations so that we can see where the findings have been put across, and we can also start to give the appetite to the parliamentarian for that constituency. I think this is very important to do an audit of the evaluations and see where they have been used, rather than to just continuously do evaluations and they continuously not being used. So the audit is very important. I can say that in the AFRED database that we've got a lot also of Zim evaluations that were conducted. I will try to check how many were conducted by different development partners. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Chirao. I was also looking at the time. We are now at 1 o'clock. In terms of the way forward, can I hand over to Dr. Shylock? To just share with us what we can do from here, the way forward, and so we don't stretch the time further. For Dr.
Thanks, Nodum. I think I'll be quite brief. This has been recorded, so I think the main points have been captured. But I think the two key issues that are coming here, I think one is just to follow through with Dr. Chirao on what needs to be tightened for us to complete the reporting on this one. And the second one has always been a recurring theme, is we need to engage and to keep engaging more broadly to harness all these opportunities. A lot of opportunities have been highlighted here, and the Secretariat and the board need to take leadership and reach out, concretize the discussions that have come here, and then we can then see how this can be moved either remotely or whenever the lockdowns are lifted. We can then look at convening these high-level plenaries for synthesis of evidence, formalizing our MOU or operationalizing it with Parliament. So for me, I think you need to then engage in a conversation with Beverly so that we can clearly itemize what skills are required, and then we can then start outsourcing within our network and start providing those skills. I think this is an opportunity time because a lot of people, you can find them online. You can have a session like this to take people through methods, analysis, and different other skills. Gilchrist, I think we did at one point try to put together a joint proposal that didn't fall through. I think this is also an opportunity for us to take up conversations leading into fully fledged programs for the next 2 or 3 years. So in short, the opportunities are vast. Both the board, Secretariat, including the members, our committed members. I think let's take these opportunities ahead and forge the association. I think in doing so, we can then achieve our culture or promote our culture of evaluation. I'll just end by thanking everyone and also letting you know that this video will be slightly edited, and then Nodumo will share a link once it's posted. We have a couple other series that are coming up. I think we've got a 2-day session to expand on some of these things, especially for commissioners of evaluation and also for suppliers of evaluation. There's a session that is coming up. And we also have another session that is going to focus on qualitative outcomes, early qualitative findings from the COVID response. So let's keep engaged and always look out for our Twitter and our email. I think let me end that and wishing everyone a great weekend, a grateful weekend. But keep learning and let's keep advancing the M&E agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Shylock. I would also just want to end by urging everyone who's not yet a member of ZIA to kindly get hold of our secretariat to join the ZIA membership. Thank you.